Welcome to Mahon. My name is Yael Wand. I'm the Executive Director of Salt Spring Arts, and it's been such a delightful weekend. We're well into it, and such a delightful week. This exhibition here at Mahon, Archipelago Contemporary Art of the Salish Sea, opened last Friday, and of course last night, many of you might have been with us. The second part of the show with the Southern Gulf, the San Juan Island artists opened last night at Art Spring. If you haven't made it over there, Art Spring is open after this talk will be done. So we had a wonderful beginning this morning with the other half of these two exhibitions, the artists. This morning we had a talk at Art Spring. So I'm really excited for this conversation. It was a beautiful conversation this morning. We've got, in a moment, we'll have all the artists introduce. I'll let our curators introduce the artists. But it's part of what the question that's been driving this collaboration is asking. What are the similarities? What are the differences? What do we not know yet? There it goes. Yay! Thanks, Anna. And what are the surprises that we have no idea we will discover? And there was a lot of that this morning. There was just really beautiful, heartwarming conversation about creating, about being an artist, about working and living in the Gulf Islands and in the San Juan Islands. And this notion of a border that seems to separate us, I think in many ways this exhibition kind of proves that it's there, but it's also not there. So I'm excited to see how that plays into this conversation today. We are here, Mahon is situated right at the edge of Ganges Harbor, and these lands and oceans are the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. And I know that these people who've inhabited these lands for time immemorial, for them that border wasn't there. There are in fact lots of families that live on the San Juan Islands and in the Gulf Islands, and those ties have been there between these islands since time immemorial. So I'm going to turn it over to our two curators. They have been working tirelessly for the past 2 weeks, installing these two exhibitions. We have Richard Steele and Patrick McCallum, and they will introduce our 6 artists.
So welcome everyone, and it's great to have another full audience. The talk this morning was fantastic. I really loved it and really enjoyed hearing everyone and their views, their similarities and differences, as Yael said. But also, as I mentioned there, that we as artists, curators, arts administrators can't do what we do unless there is an audience. And so we are very grateful and very happy to see all of you. And I hope you keep coming. Okay, so to the main people, this afternoon we have from San Juan Island, RaVae Luckhart. You may applaud. Jane Kidd from Salt Spring. Tom Small. Raven Skyriver. Joanna Rogers from Penda. And TEMOSENG Chazz Elliott from Salish. We've been getting to know all their work over the last year or two, and some of you, we obviously knew it beforehand, and it's been such an honor and a pleasure and a privilege to be able to work with you all, and it's fantastic. And we're going to find out a little bit more about it just now. I think that's about all I'm going to say to introduce, but Pat, you have a question, I think. Oh, yes.
Are we going to do this every time? Okay, I'll stand right here. So my first question then is the life of an artist is never necessarily a straight line. You make a choice at some point. I'm going to feed him back here a little bit. I'll move further away. And so my first question is the relationship between education, mentor, self-taught. Can you talk a little bit about how you came from being a younger person and discovering an interest in art to the workplace that you are now as an artist, whether it's your background academically, your background with your own self-directed studies, or was it a mentor or a teacher that influenced you at a young age and helped you to find where your voice may be today? Chazz, did you want to start us off with that?
Yeah, I grew up in an artist's house. So my mom was a weaver and my dad, he was a master carver. So I grew up around it and surrounded by seeing it all the time. So when I was growing up, it didn't feel like it was something that other people didn't do for a living. It was just like it was natural. So I saw it all the time, and my dad and my mom encouraged me to start with my doodles and carry that on. And it looked realistic as a living, seeing my dad do it and making a career out of it for 50 years. So I followed his footsteps, and it's super valuable in our culture too. It's a practice that ties our language and our cultural practices together, is our artwork. So I was able to capitalize on making a living at the same time following my culture.
Joanna, would you like to tell us a little bit about how you came to where you are today?
Hi, yes. I started my artistic life, I guess, when I was at university. I got involved with the campus community radio station, and we were all experimenting like crazy with sound. And it was just, it was an incredible opportunity. It was when everything was still analog. I don't know if it would be the same now, but it was just fantastic. And so that kind of awakened my desire to really create. And then after I'd moved to Vancouver, I took a 2-year course at Capilano College. It was textile arts. And that was from 92 to 94. And that's what really set me on the path that I've been on since then. We learned, half of what we learned was surface design, and the other half was weaving. And we were taught by wonderful, wonderful teachers who were well-known artists, well-known throughout the world, and they were fantastic to us, helping us carve out a place for each of us. And then I just have basically been working with textiles ever since then. And then the pieces that I have here are the most recent pieces that I've created.
Raven, your work has an enormous amount of skill, and I'm curious to how you came upon those skills and to create the work that you do now.
Yeah, so I actually started blowing glass in high school. So I was not very academically inclined, which is to say I hated school. and they offered a alternative high school program when I was going to school on Lopez growing up. And it was kind of a vocational program, so a lot of kids were doing construction or something like that. And so we would 2 days a week go work with someone in the community and get high school credit. And my mom, I think, suggested, oh, you should go work with Lark, who's a local glass blower. He and his wife, Corey, have all of glass on Lopez. And so I went. I was like, yeah, oh, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So I went and immediately was bit by the bug. And it's a super addictive medium to work in. It's very fascinating. But yeah, and then I just followed that. Since then, I just, the first time I tried it, I was like, this is what I want to do. So I never really strayed from that. And in 2003, I was invited to work with Karen Willenbrink Johnson, who is an amazing glass sculptor who works on William Morris's team, who has William Morris since retired. But so I worked with her when she was working for him. So she would make components for his glass work and then put them in a garage, which is where you can then take the work out and add it to his larger scale pieces. So I was working with her on his work, and then I was working with her on her work, and Karen taught me so much. So when I started blowing glass, it was very much what a lot of people who start with glass do, is kind of utilitarian, Italian style with swirls and lines and stuff. And then when I started working with Karen, I was introduced to sculptural glasswork, which is where I found I was able to create a narrative with my work and kind of express myself a lot more. And yeah, so I did that for 7 years with Karen, and first 2 years for free. And it was just a really good time in my life where I didn't have any obligations or any debt, and it was an apprenticeship. So I treated that as my college education. So I don't have any formal accredited education, but that was where I learned my foundation as a glass artist.
So how many years have you been doing glasswork now?
I've been doing it for over 20 years, so more than half my life. I started when I was 16, so
Wow.
yeah.
And you grew up on Lopez?
Yeah, I was born
Just
on
out of curiosity, I mean, how many people live on Lopez? How big an island is it?
I think there's around 3,000 to 4,000 year-round residents, and
Okay.
then similar to here, it doubles in population during the summertime. So there's a lot of second homes and tourists that come in the summer. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So fortuitous experience for you at a young age to be able to find that vocation early on, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think partly it's lucky that I'm here. I was able to stumble on glass, but partly it's because of where we are that I was able to do that, because there's lots of glass in the Pacific Northwest. So there's the local studio, and I was able to plug into it. Yeah,
Super cool.
yeah.
Tom, maybe you can tell us a little bit how you came to your skill set.
Well, my dad was a carpenter and an architect, and my mom was a music teacher, so I was surrounded by creative energy. And I think very quickly I gravitated towards making things with my hands. It was essential, just part of what I was and am. I learned to carve wood over time. I mostly started as a wood carver. Had a great teacher in high school who came from the East Coast that was a real wood carver and helped me understand how chisels work. And then I went to the University of Washington, studied metal arts, bronze casting, and got a degree. I worked with Bill Holm in learning more Native American art and learning that design approach. And a lot of that became embedded in how I think about things. Though I am not a native, there was a lot within that logic that I absorbed. And then I graduated and was asked to caretake a remote location in the Olympic Mountains. And I love hiking and climbing, so I jumped on it. And I also wanted to get away from formal art education because I felt like I wanted to develop my own ideas independently of people around me, just to see what they were and find my own identity. So it was great. I lived on a river. I lived within this old forest, and in the river were these stones. They were lenticular-shaped stones that were aged that way by the river, and I didn't know how to cut stone like that. But one day I learned how. I just started picking up blades and tools and started cutting, and it was an instant transformation. I took off. I never really looked back once I knew I could cut stone, and I still integrate other metals. But so I lived there for 4.5 years, pretty isolated, and it was a great way to kind of explore and develop my personal language, and then moved to San Juan Island, and then became part of the art culture there, and got into galleries and started showing art there. Yeah.
So how old were you when you first started living in the house there and discovered how old were you when you moved to the house in the remote area?
I graduated, I was probably maybe 29. It took me a while to get through college because I kept going on trips and wandering in the woods. But I went hiking, I came back, and the week after I came back from this 100-mile hike in the Cascades, this man comes to me and says, "Hey, do you want to caretake this cabin?" remote location, and had a barn and tool shop and no one up there, 7 miles upstream in the Olympics. And I said, okay, I'll do that. So
I think a lot of people in this room would do that. That
Yeah.
sounds like a really lovely gig, yeah.
yeah, it was perfect for where I wanted to go.
And at that time, I'm just kind of fascinated by this. So at that point, you're cutting the stone, but you're just doing it for yourself at that point?
Yeah, I'd already had a relationship with a gallery in the San Juans by accident. So, yeah, I basically self-taught myself with stone. And then years later, I stumbled across a organization, a national organization that has stone symposiums. And I was immediately absorbed into that and became a member, a student, and quickly became a teacher and a mentor. So, and that
Wow.
put me on the stone path. Yeah,
That's fantastic.
yeah.
Jane, maybe you can let us know where you came from then.
Well, I think I probably started my art career, like many people do, going to art college, university program. But it wasn't a great fit for me, and I have to say I never completed my degrees. I got distracted by traveling and other kinds of things that seemed to be more in sync with what I was interested in. But I did take, while I was in Vancouver, when I was sort of in and out of art college, I did take some courses with a woman in Vancouver, Joanna. Some of you may know that name. Fabulous weaver, tapestry weaver. And she really introduced me to the rudiments of tapestry, which was great, and it was an instant click. But most importantly, she exposed me to the idea that textiles could be an art, and that there was a whole community of people around the world, in Poland and Europe, creating these fabulous works in textiles that were unabashedly art. They were about space and color and all kinds of dynamics. And that to me was thrilling. And that was definitely the path I wanted to go. I was happy to still be linked to craft, but also to see that there was a kind of two-way street there. And then I was very lucky. I'm not quite sure how it happened, but I was offered a full-time teaching position at the Alberta College of Art and Design in Calgary. Now it's the Alberta University of the Arts. I don't know how I talked my way into that. But in a way, then I had to become an academic. And it was truly my best education. Working with colleagues, visiting artists from all over the world. I had to think about what it meant to make textiles, to be involved with craft, to see its relationship to art. I had a responsibility to students to be able to articulate this and get them involved. So truly, I learned, I think, to be an artist by teaching, and to be an academic a little bit by almost pretending to be an academic. So that was a fabulous experience for me. It was exhausting and terrifying at times, but truly that's where I formed my understanding of what art, craft, and who I am as an artist and my identity. And luckily I was able to keep working through that period of time on my own work, which is slow, and I just kind of kept on with it. So yeah, that was a great experience. Yeah, okay.
I will share that I have a friend that was a student of yours many, many years ago who I spoke to recently.
Not so many years ago.
And she's a few years ago anyway. And she said that not only were you the best teacher she ever had, you were the reason why she creates art to this day. So a great legacy as a teacher. And I'm sure one day she'll be on a panel like this and she'll mention you as that guiding light. So, RaVae.
My turn?
Your turn.
My turn. Unlike most of the other artists in this exhibition, I am not a full-time islander. I live part-time on San Juan, and I live the rest of the time in the Black Hills of South Dakota. So I grew up there, and I made pictures from the time I was very small, being the eldest of 5 on a farm in the middle of South Dakota. I had to make my own fun, and I created my own world because I didn't have neighbors to play with, and it was very simple. And it became second nature for me. So we moved away from the farm, and I entered college toward a bachelor's degree in Kansas and moved to Illinois myself and went to the University of Illinois for my bachelor's. To work my way through school, I was trained as an histologist and an electron microscopist. That made good money. My final project was illustrating live mosquito sperm. Can you, that got me out of the realistic phase very quickly. At any rate, when I went home, my father said, "Oh, I'm just so proud of you because you are making more money than I have ever made." I didn't tell him that I was an art major and I would not be making more money than he was making. At any rate, I went to I graduated from the U of I and then went to Tucson, to Arizona, and did my graduate study there. So my credentials are all through the academic system. I followed that with 25 years as a professor at the university level. And I quit that about 20 years ago, and I'm just in the studio full-time and working with our museum on San Juan Island.
RaVae, you and I had an opportunity to have a bit of a conversation at the opening of, or actually when we first met, about that spectacular series of work that you have at Art Spring right now. And the images of the deer and the images of the hooks, and you discussed this notion of the series, and I'd like to switch things up now and be talking about the process that you all experience and when you're getting into the work that you've created. So maybe since we're still speaking, can you tell me a little bit about the process that you applied maybe to that particular series or to your work in general, and how it takes you from point A to point B, what you look for, what you experience, what you are curious about, and how you get there?
That's a big question. We got a lot of time.
If you could keep it
There's
under a minute, we'd
there.
love that, because we got to move it along, right?
Well, I've been an abstract expressionist for most of my career. And most of that can be seen on my website. But one day I walked into my garage in South Dakota, and there was an elk and 7 deer hanging from the rafters. Because my men, my sons and my husband, are hunters, and we eat wild. So that's customary. My father was a hunter, so I was very accustomed to that. While I was endeavoring to choose the next theme or thought series, when I walked in on those deer, I thought, this is very abstract. Because how often do we see animals without their skins? It's a very abstract thing. It's parallel to bones. Artists have been drawing bones forever. It's an organic, very human-like form, whether it's an animal form or a human bone, excuse me. And so I started the drawing and soon realized that it isn't the subject, it's the mark. I often tell people that I am not a picture maker. I don't make pictures, I make marks. So when I start a piece, which goes back to what Patrick just asked, I may have a glimmer, but no plan. I'll put a mark on the page and I'll react to that. And when I react to that, it may require a mark over here or a different color down here. So the painting tells me what it wants, and I just follow the direction. It evolves, sometimes completely undoes itself, and reappears again in a new form. It is wonderful to go to the studio every day, because I don't know what's going to happen there, because I don't have a plan. It's exciting every day. Does that answer it?
Absolutely. Jane, I've had the opportunity, the privilege actually, to visit your studio and get some idea of at least how you work once you've decided on what the imagery is going to be and you've been able to begin it on the loom. Can you tell us a little bit about where you were before you got to that point? Because obviously when you're working on the loom, how spontaneous is it at that point?
Actually, there is a spontaneous element, and there is in my approach. But yeah, I mean, I do quite a lot of preliminary thinking about my work and research. I like to get a good grasp of where I'm going, more from a kind of emotional sense, maybe thinking about it than very involved drawings. I don't really want to spend hours doing an involved drawing of the idea and then sit and replicate it. So I like to capture the essence of where I'm going, the feeling. I certainly do drawing. I work from some photographs that I take, some photographs that I find, some found elements. I collage them. I develop my ideas. I do a lot of writing of notes on my drawings to try and encapsulate where I want to go with this, what's important about the color, the light, the idea, the feeling. So language is important. I write endless working titles. I think I find titles really useful, and I spend a lot of time thinking about titles as they are a way into the work. So my drawings are always covered with working titles, some of which were really corny, and eventually they sort of pare down to something that maybe is quite meaningful. So yeah, and there's been lots of motivations in my work. Right now, I'm very motivated by ideas around our relationship to the environment and what that conversation means, what that argument, what that struggle is, and our complicity in the way the environment is changing. And I'm trying to find where my voice can go in that conversation. And I think that lots of artists are, and I think we all wonder what we are actually adding to the conversation, but maybe there's still a driving need to somehow participate. So those ideas are definitely fueling my practice. Certainly my work is, I work a lot with symbols and pattern, and it's not explicit because I really don't want to tell you how to think or feel about a particular issue. It's more about my desire to research it, to try and understand what is happening in our world. So my works are really quite personal in that way, founded in my own confusion, I think, and desire to try and understand, and then possibly share that with others to see how we might all try and understand what in the world is happening to us at this point in the world.
Found within your own confusion. I really like that. Thank you. Thank you for that. Tom, I was such a pleasure when I was uncrating your work, and there were so many pieces I was so moved by. The bridge in particular was just, I think, a magnificent piece. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the process that goes into creating your pieces, and I'm curious as to know, are there detailed drawings or maquettes, or do you create any sort of preliminary pieces, or do you just dig right into the stone?
Well, a lot of times I start with a stone, and a lot of the pieces I have over in the show are gathered off a certain beach on the Oregon coast, and I have ideas when I gather the stones of what I think I want them to be, but then I take them home and I live with them, and I can spend 3 months, before I even put lines on the stones, and then I take my time putting lines on the stones, and it's a lot of it's about identifying the gesture of the stone and what it wants to be. I'm trying to sort of, it sounds corny, but I think it wants to be something, and if I fight that, it's not going to work. And so I spent a lot of time finding those first lines to get into them, and then I can start cutting. And that's how it starts. And I'm pursuing ideas as I go into them, and there are certain themes, like the little round stones. There's basically 2 ideas. One is capturing flow and the energy of the ocean. These stones come off a beach below a 1,500-foot basalt mountain, and the mountain is angular and jagged, and the beach is down on the shore are round and soft. And so they've been down there tumbling for thousands of years, and so there's a lot of that energy embedded in the stone, and so I want to bring that through. And the other, I just realized today, most of those stones are also talking about what's inside the stone. They're sort of giving you windows in, literally, or suggesting going into the stone. And that's a theme. At home, I have a lot of bigger stones that Richard has seen, and where you can literally sit inside the stone or crawl into the stone or lie down and take a nap in the stone. But I think that's the other idea, and that's the process, getting at the process again of exploring being in the stone. And I think overall, that's part of me. Part of that is the stones are ancient and they carry geologic earth history, and we're very, very fleeting. And so the final theme there is that I'm comparing our sense of time with that sense of time and trying to find some wisdom in going into that deeper time.
I think that's one of the things I love most about your stone sculptures is a sense of natural logic, in the sense that it looks to me as though the stone meant to be there in that way, in the way you've shaped it.
Yeah.
You haven't tried to find dominion over your materials by forcing it into a certain way. You've allowed the stone to evolve into what you've created it, but there's a naturalness to it that I think is really beautiful.
Good.
And one last question. You say you put lines on the stone. You physically draw on the stone?
Yeah. So that's way better than drawing on paper. I do draw on paper. There's 3 pieces in that show that are the 3 windows. I did one sketch in the mountains while hiking in the Olympics, and it was just that, and I thought, that I have to bring that out in stone. It's just sort of a yin-yang-esque curve with a window. I just love that, and I thought, how do I bring that to the stone? So that was my one sketch. It's a 3-minute sketch, but it just sort of captured a little idea. But the stone itself rules. I mean, no matter what I think or draw, when I get on the stone, it has its own energy.
It feels like that, like there's a partnership to some degree, or a collaboration, perhaps.
Yeah.
Oh, so cool. RaVae, I can only imagine that there's the technical element, but there's also a lot of research must go into, because you're creating sea animals that seem very authentic in their scale and their movement and things like that. I'm curious as to how much of that is, do you take time to research the animals before you create them with sketches or models, or how does your process unfold?
So for my work, I definitely research the animals. What's really important to me is form and proportion. So if I'm making a whale, I want it to be a gray whale. I don't want it to be a whale shape, So, and often I do try to go for hyperrealism, like with the salmon or whatever, but often what's more important, I can simplify that whale shape, and as long as I get the proportions right, I can then play with color and gesture and stuff like that. But I still want it to convey the species that it is, and so that's really important to me. So yeah, I always use a reference when I'm working. I always have something to look at, and I'm looking at the scale of the fins as compared to the body and the overall proportions of the work. So that is definitely something I'm focused on. And I actually have several books on fish and on whales, and I have, the Marine Mammals of the World book. And a lot of times I'll just rip something off the internet and look at a photo. And but those marine mammal books are really cool because they have photos, but they also have a taxonomic drawing of it. And I feel like when it's already been rendered once, it's easier to work from, because my eye doesn't have to say, oh, it's foreshortened in the photo or this or that, or so I can and then beyond that, it tells their range, where they live, their feeding habits, their threats and their status, and most importantly, their identifying characteristics. So you would know, like, what's the difference between a false killer whale and a pilot whale or something like that. So it explains that. And so then you can focus on that when you're making the thing, is like, oh, these are the defining characteristics that makes this species what it is. So I'm definitely super focused on that, and very interested in biodiversity in the natural world, and how to represent that in a way that doesn't come across as kitsch or cartoonish. So I'm trying to always put some gesture or some movement into the static element. It's a sculpture that's sitting on a pedestal on a metal stand. So I'm trying to figure out how I can make it dynamic. And so that's a lot of what I'm focusing on.
Well, for those of us that don't know, and I'm very curious, I see a whale made out of glass. How did you make a whale out of glass? Honestly, can you just walk me through how did you do it?
That is.
Unless it's proprietary or something.
No, not
like
at
that.
all. Not at all. It's just. I'm a total glass nerd, so I could geek out on glass, but there's a vernacular around glass as well, and I don't know how much I could speak to it and have people understand the process necessarily. So it's something that you were talking about a little bit, is like craft art. What's craft?
Right.
What's art? So and never the tween shall meet, or maybe craft's a dirty word, but I feel exactly the opposite. I feel like if you're a good artist and you're a true artist, you need to know your craft, because anyone can write a thesis or anyone can bullshit their way through something, and sometimes academics like that. But for me, if you practice your craft and you hone your skill, that is your vocabulary. And once you have your vocabulary, then you can be an artist and speak your voice and your mind and through your artwork. So I feel like honing your craft is essential. And I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I'm always learning more, and I always want it to be that way. So technique is super important to me, and the technical aspect of making glass is super important to me, as much as the product itself. So,
Right.
That doesn't answer your question, but it's there's so many variables of how to apply color, of how to work a piece. But I guess the most distilled thing would be, I usually make the components first. So I'll make the fins, and I'll make the eyes or whatever it is, and that kind of dictates the size of the piece. So if I'm going to make a large scale piece, I'll make big fins or big eyes, and then so that has a myriad of ways you can apply color to it and get the effects you want. And then once you have those components, I can cool those down and look at them or whatever, and then I can heat them back up. And then once I start the bubble, the main body of the piece, you have to finish it. So once, basically, carving is reductive. You're taking away to get to your form, and glass is very much additive. So you're gathering more glass until you have the amount that you need to make the piece, and then you can also inflate it so it gets larger to fit the scale and the size. So it's endlessly fascinating material. It's a fluid, so when it's warm, it's moving and it's soft, and once it gets below 900 degrees, you can hear it, like whack it and hear it ting ting ting. So it goes from a fluid to a solid very quickly. And I guess, not to take up too much time, but just one thing I wanted to mention about the process. Like, process to me is so important, and it's something I enjoy very much. And my process always involves teamwork. So I'm not a musician, but I would equate it to being in a band or something. So the people that I work with are very skilled artists in their own right, and everyone brings something to the table. And like, if I'm sitting in the driver's seat, I'm saying, oh, I want this color, we're gonna do this now, but we're a team. So everyone's working on the focus goal of getting that piece into the oven to where it will cool down eventually. So that process is very different, I think, from a lot of the painters and stuff like that, because I'm working with a group of people. Even the smallest thing is maybe 2 people working on it. So.
Wow. Yeah. There's always a lot of debate about the notion with creativity and being an artist, is how much of it is the tactical skill you have as a painter, as a sculptor. And certainly the panel we have here today is a great example of people who are masters of their skill. They have creative ideas, but all of you are so talented and so skilled in whatever medium that you work in, which I think is exciting because it's easier for people to assume that, well, you know, you just do what you feel. Well, you spend years and years and years developing a vocabulary in whatever your medium may be so that you can do that successfully and consistently. Joanna, you're a person who's got tremendous skill as well with your work. Can you talk about your process as well?
Yeah, I can. My pieces, I tend to work in series because I'll develop an idea and it gets so involved that I feel like I can't necessarily express it just in one piece. So I want to be able to create a piece and then have the next piece kind of springboard off the piece before it, and so that they work off each other and are a progression. And I really, really like working in multiples because of that. I usually will start with a central idea. It might be a fleeting thought. It might be something I heard, a phrase that I heard on a radio program or read in a news article, and it will just embed itself in my brain and will start to grow, kind of like the way crystals grow. It'll start multiplying and multiplying. And at some point, I just have to bring all the thoughts together and decide how I would like to approach that particular idea, what technique I'd like to use, what I think is going to be the best way to capture the idea visually, and then work from there and just keep building and building and building on idea upon idea upon idea. And so often when I finished, I'll have a series of pieces, and for me to say what they're about, it would be like writing a novella, because there's this sort of unraveling all the ideas and then getting down to the kernel that was the very, very beginning of that process.
It's really neat. Chazz, unlike many non-Indigenous artists, we don't necessarily have a cultural tradition to draw from, and you do. And I'm curious how that informs your sense of responsibility about your work, the kind of work that you do, the legacy that you, obviously in the back of your mind, when you create works, there is a great cultural traditional legacy. But how does that affect your process?
I think, a lot of our culture revolves with coexisting with the nature around us. So a lot of our stuff before we start our work is just listening. And a lot of elders and a lot of people who do have that knowledge is who we sit down with and gather our information. And then whatever we carve or whatever we make, it's based or it's symbolic of those things we just learned. And then we kind of carry it on through teaching or show and tell afterwards to pass that knowledge on, because a lot of the carvings we have done for hundreds of years, they've been a way to document our history, our knowledge, and just pass it on. So it's really documenting the things that we know about our nature around us and how to work with it and try to do as little damage as possible to it, coexisting.
Thank you, Chazz. Just touching on a couple of things I was thinking about scale and how, as a collective here, you're all very different, and you work in very different mediums, and it's quite striking how different. However, I think also there is another thing that shines through is, despite your different educational backgrounds, how you came to become artists is the drive that you all have, and be it from a moment of revelation, really, where you find a stock and you make a rock, a stone, and you put your first line and carving in, and then bingo, or you go down the road and Raven sees his the glassworker there, and suddenly thinks, yes, this is for me. And Jane, you had moments as well, and Chazz, your upbringing. It's there, but then everyone can have those moments, but then it's then what you do with them. And something I'm very interested in is curiosity, and everyone is curious about something and about many things, and there are many mysteries in the world. But I maybe I'm completely up the wrong tree, but I feel that perhaps from that moment that sparks, that you begin to see your potential artistic future, that there's curiosity that builds in you to see how far you can go. And perhaps this comes out in your work, so that even if it's a very technical piece, and if it's carving in a rock, you still have curiosity to see how it develops. Will it be different next time? Will that rock be a little bit different? The glass, same thing. Maybe you've done a salmon and you do another salmon, but there's a difference. And how is that going to, how can I change this? How will this, oh, there's a new technique, there's a new technology. Do you all still feel curious? Do you want to scratch that curiosity? Do you want to get to the end of it and then find something else to be curious about? Or are you just whatever? RaVae.
Well, sometimes I think I'm at the end of this last series, and then other times I feel like there's one more in there. I think when one works in series, it's very much like a chemist doing a series of experiments. She does one, and the results come up with, well, it could be this way or it could go this way. So then she goes to this one and does it again, and it bifurcates again. And the same with this one over here. So it'll go until you decide to stop. And I still have thoughts about that other series, but I haven't done any more since the large piece that isn't here in this exhibition. My work does not reflect my surroundings in terms of I'm not an islander all the time. I had the good fortune to live next to the water because it was on my bucket list after living in my life in South Dakota. The water was important. My work is more internal. So I paint the same thing whether I'm in South Dakota or if I'm in Washington, because it's an internal process and it doesn't change until I'm done with that series. Or as Joe says, when I stop painting, then it's done.
I'm always fascinated with the idea of artists working in series, because I think that it begins a journey that takes you from one place to another place, and you create a body of work that you may remain associated with for a large amount of your career, or it may just be a digression that takes you to another series that maybe is another thing. My question, just to further where you're talking about, is how long does it take you before you feel deep down that series is complete, that the well is dry, and that you can move on?
I don't know that you ever get to that
That
place,
was my question,
really.
yeah.
I don't think so. This last series is over 5 years long, maybe 7 years long. So it's kind of just gone on and on. The curiosity comes up when you find an answer, but there's always but what if? What if this happened? So then that leads you to the next piece.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. Chazz, how about you? I imagine there's a huge amount to be curious about in your family history and your people's history and culture. And there's the world outside of that as well. And are you interested in exploring different avenues
Oh yeah, I am for sure. One of my curiosities is going down the fashion route with our indigenous art. Um, yeah, I'm totally interested in all of that. Like even hearing everyone up here, I wondered myself, like, maybe I should try it all out too. They're all up to. Yeah, always be open to it. That's how I've always been. Um, just for now, I'm just gonna stick to wood carving, and maybe in years to come, I'll take a jab at the other mediums.
Okay, great, thank you. Jane, how about you? Curiosity, and where do you want to go? Where do you take it?
Yeah, I think I'm curious. I'm curious about the world, and because my work is a response to the world around me, I think, yeah, I'm endlessly curious. I'm curious about what I'm going to do next. I suppose for somebody who's worked with the same process for, 40 years or so, one might question how curious can I be about that process. But in fact, I think for many people who work within a box, within an enclosure of a process, there are lots of dusty corners. And yeah, I'm curious to really investigate the process that I work with and see it in its multiple possibilities. And I still feel after 40 years that there's quite a lot still to do within the realm of tapestry, working in different ways. I don't feel that I'm particularly innovative. I'm not sure that innovation really exists unless you're working with maybe new media, but I like to experiment. And I do feel I'm maybe innovative within the confines of my own practice, the boundaries of my practice, of things I've never worked with. And so, yeah, every time I start a piece, I'm curious. I'm curious what it'll be like, whether I can hold on to the idea all the way through a long process, what it'll look like when I unroll it. There's curiosity the whole way, and I make changes as I go. But yeah, I'd say generally curiosity does fuel what I do, even though I've been doing it for a long time. And yeah, it certainly fuels the ideas that I'm experimenting with about the world and my position in it and where we're going. Yeah.
Good. Well, stay curious, please, and keep working. Tom, I know that you started work on a 13-foot canoe. I have to say, which is it granite or
It's granite,
It
yeah.
is granite. I have doubts that it will float. But I think it's great to be curious to find out if it does. But no, that's a joke. I'm sorry. The scale that you work in and the rocks that you find and you take to the top of your mountain to work on. I mean, there's an awful lot of imagination, I think, to see a very large. Perhaps explain a little bit the scale, the size, and the weight of these rocks, and to think, yes, I can make out of that. I mean, that's got to be curiosity and it's got to be imagination. Can you talk a little bit about that? And how large are some of the stones you pull up the mountain?
Why did I didn't know I was going to be a stone carver when I moved up on top of Katy Mountain. I thought I was a wood carver 33 years ago. I was doing little stones, and it's quite a drive up the mountain, 2 miles, 500-foot elevation gain through an old forest on a bumpy road. But I'm a stone carver, and the mountain itself is stone. It's all one beautifully shaped stone, which is another interesting topic. That's where all these islands are incredibly shaped stones and stone carvings by glaciers. But yeah, I think part of the physical, technical challenge of approaching big stones fascinated me, and I love cutting big rocks quickly and seeing big saws move through the stone and then starting to think, it's a little bit intellectual, how do I get in and create the shape efficiently? But it's also scary. I mean, the canoe is a little scary. I'm actually at a turning point in the canoe now where I have a design challenge where it's that big and it's that much of a commitment that if you want to step back and it's a little bit scary because, oh, what if I make a mistake and take this part away? But I'm going to take that part away and find the right line. But it's it's interesting. It's a larger commitment with just, you're only reducing, you're not gluing. So you take it away, you get what you get. But I love the scale. And and I'm still learning and being curious. And part of what's nice about big stones is the relationship of the size of my body with the stone. It feels like a more of a balance in some ways. Instead of having a little thing on a table or I'm doing that, sometimes the big stone is really satisfying to work around. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much. And Raven, for you as well. I mean, I had the pleasure and the privilege to visit you in your wonderful studio and see your kilns and what you had built there to make everything possible, to have the environment where you can create and you don't have to stop and go to other sources.
Yeah.
How important, I mean, obviously it's got absolutely vital to you, but can you talk a little bit about that, your relationship with your tools perhaps and your
Yes.
work environment?
Yeah. So I would just want to say too, my wife Kelly Odell, who can't be here, is also a glass artist. So we share our studio, and we're very lucky to have each other, in the sense that you can't do a lot on your own. So, so glass is interesting medium in the fact that it requires a ton of infrastructure. So, not that diamond saws are cheap or other things like that, but to blow glass you need a furnace, and you need a working station, and you need kilns to anneal in, and you need a lot of propane and a lot of electricity. And a lot of my work, all of my work, is based in nature and biodiversity and the preservation of those things, and ruminating on our impact on those things. So I wrestle with that a little bit because it's a very energy intensive art form. We had this dream to build a studio. We've taught all over the world and been in a lot of different studios. We lived in Stanwood, Washington, we lived just a mile down the road from Pilchuck Glass School for 15 years. And so we've seen so many different studios and so many things that work and don't work, and so many private studios that are converted from a barn or a garage or something like that. And so we had the great privilege and honor to run a Kickstarter campaign that was very successful, and we got a huge amount of support from collectors and friends and family to build our studio. And so we had the luxury and the privilege to build from the ground up a glass studio with the idea of it being a glass studio in mind. So we have giant steel I-beams. The space is completely open. There's no post in the middle of the shop. So if you're carrying a 5-foot long, blowpipe with a 4-foot long sculpture on the end of that, it's not going to be in your way. And we have a floor drain so we can hose down, because silica dust is not great to breathe. And so our space is, without a doubt, like the nicest studio I've ever been in. So we go in there and we're just pinching ourselves like, oh my God, this is so awesome. We've been working in that space for 2.5 years now, and it's just like, yeah, you come in and you're like, oh man, this is the spot. So it's really, really amazing to be able to utilize that space. And I feel like the first couple years we were working, we were kind of just trying to figure it out and figure out help and figure out the space and catch up, because we had been building for so long. And another thing is, my brother-in-law's a builder, and so Kelly and he and I built we physically built the studio. So we didn't have contractors or anything like that. So that's a really cool relationship with the space that we work in too. We know it, but then just this year, I feel like I made this large-scale humpback whale with this beautiful coloration and all this stuff. And I was like, holy cow, like I just made one of my favorite pieces I've ever made, like in my home studio. So it was a really cool feeling. And yeah, that's super gratifying. And also because we live on an island and we're secluded, you know, we tried to basically set up a cold shop so we can grind the glass afterwards. And my dad has a metal shop, so we can make our stands and everything. So basically we have to be very self-sufficient. I know that all of you living on islands know how that is, but we have to have our little universe there, and we're so fortunate to have that. So.
No, great. I mean, I would imagine you have a great sense of freedom when you can go into the studio each day and you just know it's going to work.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't have that, so that's fantastic for you. Joanna, I don't want to pigeonhole you at all, but I imagine you're an endlessly curious person, and I think it's wonderful. Joanna is a great collector, if anyone doesn't know that. So her pieces are at the end and on the wall over here, and the one with all the buttons, that is Joanna's mother's button collection and other people's button collections. But Joanna has collections of many things, and we have shown a few other pieces over the years here on the stage with garments and capes and copes and armor and different things made out of tea bags, bread bag ties, Joanna's own hair. There was a skirt and a little jerkin, that was lovely. So I think, yes, you explore, don't you? Good, I'm glad. I didn't get that wrong.
I do. I think I probably have infinite curiosity. I'm so curious about almost everything, and my mind just barely stops. I was just constantly going over and over things. When I have an idea, I want to find out more and more about every little bit. So, I mean, just taking the button cope, I mean, the shape is based on a medieval garment that would have been worn by a head of state or head of church, highly ornamented, often with embroidery. And I chose to decorate this particular one with buttons and, yeah, different collections. It wasn't actually my mother's button collection because my parents' house burned down and everything in it was lost, which is maybe one of the reasons why I value collections of things, because so much of our family history was lost. But my collecting, I have to say, was predated that by quite a lot. But anyway, so I had my own button collection, and then I realized I didn't have enough to finish the cope, so I put out a call on Pender Island. And I got 5 button collections donated to me, and that was such a thrill. And it was so amazing to incorporate not only my own collection, but the memories that came along with the collections of other people. And but just going back to curiosity and ideas, my parents came from Birmingham. And one of the industries in Birmingham was button making. So I had that connection. Like everything for me, like, has to have multiple connections and ideas. And even if no one else knows about them, like, they're there. The accompanying one, well, I don't want to go into too much detail because this is my artist talk on Monday. But I'll talk maybe a little bit about the hanging pieces. In terms of curiosity, I'm always looking for new ways to achieve the kind of results that I want. So those pieces are dyed and over-dyed in iron vats and tannin vats. And that's a process that I just learned last year. And I was thrilled to finally have a means to create the look that I'd been wanting to achieve for so long. So that was fantastic. So I feel like I'm constantly learning. Before that, I spent quite a few years learning how to dye with natural dyes, because that was very important to me, and I wanted to incorporate those more and more into my work. And now I only work with natural dyes. I don't use any of the beautiful synthetic dyes that I used to work with. So just that there's so much to know about all those things. It just feeds one's curiosity endlessly.
Oh, thank you, and I'm sorry, I didn't want you to spoil your talk on Monday and give too much away. I bet you do, I bet you do. One final quite quick question, then we'll see if anyone has questions from the audience. And Raven, you talking about your studio, and you said, and your father with the metal shop, and your brother-in-law, and da-da-da-da-da. So you have your world, you have everything you need there, but that is very rare on an island to have. So just a quick one to each of you. Why do you live on an island as an artist? Would it not be better for you somewhere else? Maybe in a city? Maybe, and RaVae, because you're in both places. Quick answer, long answer, whatever. Jane?
Well, I've lived in cities most of my life. Victoria, Vancouver, and then in Calgary for 34 years. So the city environment is really familiar to me. So I think when I retired from teaching, it seemed natural to move back to the coast, which is where I grew up. I have family here, my only really remaining family. So the draws were personal. I don't think I anticipated them being particularly influential on me as an artist, where I think it has been particularly influential on me as an artist to move back here. But I didn't anticipate that. I think it was more personal choice. I wanted to be in a smaller community and quieter community, and yeah, really more personal than aesthetic. But yeah, I think moving back here has been a tremendous influence in terms of feeling part of a community that is very concerned about our relationship to the world around us and the environment, and willing to look at a kind of complicity in that and considering where we should go. So I feel that sensibility is a real draw for me, and maybe in contrast to Calgary, has proven to be quite an influence. Yeah.
Thank you. RaVae?
The question is, why on the island?
Yes, and I know you live off an island as well. So
I wanted to be next to the water because I've lived in the Black Hills. I've lived in a lot of states. I moved around a lot, but I wanted to live next to the water, and it's right out my front window, so I'm very close to it. I don't know how much it influences my work. As I've said in my artist statement, my work is about much more than a deer on a hook. It's about using a metaphor for the human condition. So looking at each one of those pieces that I brought here, you have a different kind of emotion or a different human experience entailed in the imagery. And many more, of course, because there's 30 or 35 pieces altogether.
and as you said, you paint the same either in South Dakota or in San Juan.
But also, Rich, I don't know if you know, I was a printmaker. I have a full print studio in Rapid City with an intaglio press, a big one, and a big litho press next to the dining room table, because my children and I lived in the studio. But the reason I mention that is this whole idea of process. If there was ever anything with process, it's printmaking. And it is slow. I love carrying the stones, I love working on the stones, but it takes forever to bring an idea to fruition. Hence, the printmaking kind of went aside and the paint came out, because it's faster. Lots more ideas in a shorter period of time.
Yeah, I can see that. Thank you. Tom, you've maybe talked about this a little bit, the same thing. Why live on the island when you have to go to Oregon to get a truck to bring a big boulder up to work on? I think I know the answer, but because it's a beautiful place and you feel very good there. But do you want to confirm that or deny that?
Can you repeat that?
I guess you love your home and that's why you live there.
Yeah, yeah. It's. I think I have become the land more than the land becoming me. That's hard to explain. But yeah, I don't really know how I got there. I remember looking for land after I left the Olympic Mountains and knowing I wanted to be in a quiet place and own a pretty big chunk of land that was very private, and but also have an arts community within an hour's drive and a decent hardware store. You know, you need that if you're a sculptor. And I was already showing art in the San Juan Islands by chance, and so I had a thing going there. But yeah, it narrowed down pretty quickly to San Juan, and it was a pretty exciting land search to find a remote piece for nearly nothing that we had to bushwhack and crawl through the forest to get to it, and I couldn't get to it until I, without a shovel and a chainsaw for quite a while to fit a truck in there. But now we've grown into it. Shannon and my kids.
And you're happy there.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
so that's it. Yeah.
And it's just living there has really shaped how I think about art. I really have not engaged much with the outside art world, but as I carve, it's all there around me, and I walk in it all the time, and it literally is coming through my feet and through my body and my brain and back out into the stone, and it works.
Yeah, fantastic. Raven, now we talked already because you have everything there, but the market, and so I know you sell in many galleries across the continent, and is that easy to do, to oversee from Lopez, or would it be better for you to be somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of both, I guess. It's from a commercial standpoint, like I do have galleries in Seattle, which is local, or a gallery in Seattle, but then I also show across the country, like you said. So does it make much of a difference? Maybe not. From a financial standpoint, it's counterintuitive because you've got to put a ferry ticket on everything. So propane's more expensive, electricity is more expensive. All of our materials, have to come to us. So that's a little bit of a factor. But I was born on Lopez Island, in a little cabin with no running water or electricity, and I grew up there for the first 20 years of my life. So it's very much a part of who I am, and the Salish Sea and the surrounding area is very much of what informs my work. So I think, I moved to the mainland, but not far away, just Skagit Valley, to pursue, to learn more about my craft and about my artistic pursuit, and then coming back just feels really like a homecoming. So, and I mentioned earlier, like we work in teams, and that's a necessity. But aside from a team, like working together in glass, because it requires teamwork, it actually fosters community. So we go to each other's weddings and funerals and births and stuff like that. So, and growing up on the island, I had a very strong sense of community. So I feel like living on the mainland, I was able to kind of hack that because I had this community of glass artists that we work with and who we really share a common bond with. And so, some people couldn't wait to get off the island, and I really like growing up there. So it's a big impetus for being there is to raise our kid there, and for him to have that same sense of community and to also be surrounded in the nature and the beauty that's there. So it is counterintuitive maybe in some ways, but we have that universe of infrastructure and stuff not because it's just there, but out of necessity, because we want to be there, and so we created that for ourselves so that we could be there and make it work. So,
Fantastic.
yeah.
And Chazz, you're from the bigger island, and I don't know, do you ever hanker to maybe go somewhere else, work somewhere else? Would that change how you or influence how your art is influenced? Maybe if you got into fashion, would you go somewhere else?
Well, I have my family. I've got a good workspace. I love where I live. I don't see myself moving anywhere, but I can see myself traveling and trying to open just open my eyes to the rest of the world and experience different cultures. That's something I'd like to do. Maybe a culture exchange, something. But I'm gonna stay where I am.
Good on you. Well done. And Joanna, you're on Pender Island, which is not many people at all, even less than Lopez, I think. Oh, no, maybe not. How many thousands?
Well, it's just seems like it's very populated right now compared to how it was when I moved there 23 years ago. But it's the same everywhere. We have about 2,500 full-time people and 5,000 or more in the summer when the part-timers and visitors come. Yeah, so it's bustling now. But even in the height of the summer, I've been there long enough that I know the secret trails that many people don't know about and don't go to, and the little hidden beaches where I can go, and then there are sometimes it's nice just to wander along a trail where in the winter you'll meet no one, and in the summer you encounter people and have conversations, and that's lovely too. But it's very different from Salt Spring. I come here and I feel like, oh, I'm in the big city. So many people, so much traffic, oh my goodness. But then I realized, well, no, not really, but
And do you think artistically that if you were on Vancouver Island or on the mainland, would that, I'm sure it would actually, dramatically change how you work and what you...
You know what? I know that what I'm making is very much a response to me being on Pender. Now, I might end up creating similar things if I was living elsewhere, because I think the central ideas behind my work would still be the same. But I imagine that the found objects that I incorporate would be different. And they're often the jumping off point for a piece. And so, I did live in Vancouver for 10 years. And the work I was making there was very different. It was based on bubble wrap. So I hated to see things thrown away. It was just, I just couldn't bear the thought of the waste. And I mean, there's so much wrong with that. So I worked at Vancouver Co-op Radio, right downtown in Vancouver, and my office was opposite the office of the music director. And this was a long time ago. He would receive CDs in the mail and would open them and would give me the bubble wrap. And because I liked popping the bubbles, it's like, Anyway, and then after I had done that, I was just like, oh my goodness, I cannot just throw this away. That is just so awful. And I took it home and I kept it thinking, one day I'm going to figure out how to use it. And I did. I learned how to melt and paint it and create a fabric that I could use to make pieces. So that was very much a response to living in the city. My life in the city at that time. So I think my work would be very different if I lived elsewhere.
Oh, well, thank you all for those answers, and I feel really happy that it seems that you just want to be where you are, and the reason you are because you're happy and you feel good there, and that, of course, informs how you are as an artist, and it's great. You don't necessarily need everything to paint, to work. You can be inspired and be curious anywhere. Thank you, that's great. Anyone have any answers for these artists? And they'll give you some questions back. Any questions? Oh, yes, yeah.
I have a question for Chazz. Chazz, I adore your work, and I love the fact that you obviously are carrying a tradition that has been passed down to you, and yet I also find this incredibly contemporary and different that I've seen before the carvings. And I wonder if you could speak to that. How do you play with the forms and the stories and the tradition that you carry, and also putting yourself into it?
That's a good question.
Oh, that's a tough one. For example, there's a piece over there. It has a salmon head sticking out. So that's not something like that carving there, it's not something that's in our culture you'd see be used or exercised. It was symbolic to a fish escaping out of a net, and it's actually escaping out of a hole where that hole is actually purposely used in one of our fishing nets called a reef net, and it's an act of conservation, so we don't take everything. So the fish can purposely escape, and we take whoever chooses stays, or whoever sees out can get out. So I guess I try and work ideas, like more so ideas into the art I do today. So it may not be as functional for cultural practices, but it might be able to tell something that we do in our culture, which right there is act of conservation. But and then I could display it at a show, or it just makes people like, maybe we can harvest, and we can not harvest the way we're doing it now, but we can work different ways in. So that's how I can kind of make it more contemporary, is taking our ideas and putting them, using our old traditional style of art and creating pieces like so.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Raven, could you tell us a little bit about your octopus?
Yeah, so I'm a lot of my work is directly tied to this place, and the octopus is one of those. The giant Pacific octopus is the largest species of octopus in the world, and it resides in these waters. And of course, I find that creature to be endlessly fascinating. They have like 8 brains and 3 hearts, and they can regrow limbs, and all of those things just are phenomenal. They're delicious. It's also a perk. So what a form, right? It's such an amazing thing, and so again, I'm trying to make it slippery and feel like it's moving and full of life, and glass is amazing in that way that it can convey this fluid motion. Like, it doesn't want to be angular and have hard corners. It wants to crack when it's like that, but when it's round or when it's fluid, and it really lends itself to that. So I try to always make sure that I'm conveying that in the work, and then a lot of it for me, like I said, I'm fascinated in the process and the technical aspect. I want to try to get the color. I want to try to get the form. And I can say that octopus is a super pain in the ass to make, because it has, I wish it had 4 tentacles instead of 8, as it's just a very long process. Compared to a lot of people's process, it's actually very short. But the thing about glass is you just can't set it down. So once you start, it's like, okay, here we go, and things can go wrong, and it can end up on the floor. So the octopus is a really good challenge, and it's something that I revisit often and try to find different iterations of how, whether it's swimming and jetting away, or whether it's resting, or So I'm actually working on a piece right now where I'm trying to make a clamshell, and then I want to put an octopus inside of it, because sometimes they carry their little armor with them, and then they hide inside of it. So it's just always endless possibilities with what you can do.
Ron.
I have a kind of a specific question for Tom. Tom, do you work with other stones? Is your island sandstone? The stone that you have in the pieces that you've done in the exhibition, it's mostly brought from a riverbed off the island?
Yeah, most of those stones are from a beach on the ocean down in Oregon. But I work stones from all over the world, but I really like Washingtonian or locally harvested stones. I like granite from gravel pits are amazing places to get granite because they throw the big boulders to the side because they don't want to crush them. And so there's these incredible round granite boulders that are embedded in the old glacial moraines that kick out. And then I also get columnar basalt, which comes from eastern Washington, and I think you've got that up here in Canada, more inland, the big giant basalt columns. But those are my primary stones, and I like the fact that they're local and they carry the energy of the area, and they want to be here.
Oh, yes, Bruce.
I'm not sure if it's so much a question, but more like an observation. It seems a few of the artists are working almost like scientists working backwards, trying to reveal the essence of the material, even if it's glass or if it's stone. And then conversely, a scientist who's trying to reveal the essence of what was in the garage that morning when we walked in. It seems like what's in the stone, what's in the paint. It's about the human condition, it seems, as you as artists revealing it, but you're revealing something essential about the medium, each of you.
So, yes. Does anyone want to comment on that at all? Or?
I don't know that I have a comment, but I think that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that parallel in the reverse. I think it's true, it works that way. But the investigation, for instance, that I'm doing, I'm looking out there, but the answers are here. And I only know it when it's out there and I can see it. Sometimes I don't see it for a while.
When you happened upon your garage studio and came upon the carcasses of the deer, did that conjure up a rumination on life and death too, like Sutin or Rembrandt?
Oh, sure. As a matter of fact, I had the first oil that I did in the garage in front of the deer. There's 3 hanging together, and I'm painting at below zero in the garage with a wool coat on, stocking cap, and boots and mittens. And my husband came and took a picture over my left shoulder as I'm doing this. It looks like I'm carving the meat. It's that, it's that clear. So I was comfortable. I've always been comfortable because I grew up with it. It wasn't a new experience. It was just the first time that I realized it was also very abstract, and there was a lot of potential for a lot of investigation and understanding in that subject.
Actually, if I could just touch on that again for a moment, RaVae. Do you think to create a series of work that will likely be challenging for maybe the average gallery goer, does it take a certain amount of maturity or courage, or is it something do you think it's a body work you might have created as a much younger person, or do you think it's a period in your life when you feel confident to create a body of work like that?
No, I've worked in series since I was in graduate school, always in series. I had 2 major fears leaving school and moving to South Dakota. One, I did not want to be hampered by the Southwest palette because I painted in Tucson. You know what the colors are in the Southwest. And the other thing was in painting the same thing over and over and over again, which people tend to do if they get a sale and then they keep doing those or slight modifications. So I wanted to make sure that every painting was different. So when you start with one, then it comes, what is the what if? And then what if? And you know you're not going to do 2 alike.
Okay, I think that's it. We're out of time. So again, a big thank you all for coming. It was really good to see you, and I hope you enjoyed this. I mean, as we said this morning, we could probably go on for hours and explore other subjects. But thank you all so much for sharing what you have done with us, because I think it's endlessly fascinating, and it's really interesting to know and to understand how artists are similar to each other, and yet they're different. They have different processes, perhaps different inspirations. However, they all work really hard, and they're really driven, and they're all wonderful people. And yeah, thank you so much. Please, a big applause.